You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, 7th of May 2014. Petition calls for birthday of Bradford honour violence victim to be used for annual memorial. Immigrant crack and heroin dealer will finally be deported after 8 years of his human rights to family life. Islam creates monsters, says psychologist. Denmark, outsourcing to China doesn't pay off. IMF demands Ukraine risk World War III in return for bailout money. I'm no kafir in the invasion of Italy. US-EU space missions depend on Russian technology. Russia to beef up Black Sea Fleet. FBI, flow of foreign fighters into Syria growing. Gang-raped Indonesian woman may be caned publicly. Thought for the day, cheese, food and truths. And finally, would you Adam and Eve it? UK news. Petition calls for birthday of Bradford honour violence victim to be used for annual memorial. Campaigners pushing for a national Memorial Day for victims of so-called honour killings have suggested the birthday of Bradford-born victim Shafilea Ahmed as the annual date. They're calling on people to sign an online petition to lobby David Cameron to make July the 14th the special day. Nirvana, a charity supporting victims of honour crimes, supported by a magazine Cosmopolitan, has started the campaign, which also aims to help women break the silence surrounding forced marriages. Shafilea died in 2003 after suffering years of honour-based violence, including an attempted forced marriage. The 17-year-old's parents drugged her and flew her to Pakistan and later suffocated her to death in front of her siblings. In 2012 her parents were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. World at 8. Although I feel sorry for this poor dead girl, I read up on this case and her community kept silent for years, where this sort of crime is commonplace. We should not acknowledge it as anything more than that in the UK, otherwise we are admitting we are overrun with another culture. Immigrants, however long they have been here, do not integrate and should keep to our official days, and if they don't like it, go. No surrender from World at 8. Immigrant crack and heroin dealer will be finally deported after 8 years of his human right to family life. An immigrant drug baron will finally be thrown out of Britain after he exploited human rights laws to legally stay in the country and commit more crimes for 8 years. Mahmoud Jaber, 31, had been peddling heroin and crack cocaine in Lancashire to live a lavish lifestyle and served 3 jail terms. But although he was told he would be deported as long ago as 2006, Palestinian-born Jaber, whose father lives in the UK, used Article 8 of the Human Rights Act to successfully appeal the order, arguing he had a right to family life. Yet he was then convicted of a string of further drug trafficking offences, claiming he was emotionally scarred into drug taking by his experiences after being born in a refugee camp in the Palestinian West Bank. When he was again warned he would be deported back to Palestine, Jaber again used Article 8 in a bid to stay in the UK. Today it was revealed that after a series of legal battles and appeals, an immigration judge has ordered Jaber to be sent back to Palestine, saying the criminal had an appalling history. It is thought the case will have cost the taxpayer thousands of pounds in legal fees. World at 8, we are just sitting ducks, aren't we? European news. Islam creates monsters, says psychologist. Danish psychologist Nikolai Sennels, an expert in working with Muslim youth criminal offenders, has written a new book entitled Among Criminal Muslims. A psychologist's experience from the Copenhagen municipality, and in an essay supporting the book, he claims that Islam creates monsters. A recent study out of Germany supports Sennels' statement. It found that devout Muslims were more prone to violence than non-Muslim participants in the study. Sennels says Islam is different from other religions because the way it is taught brainwashes its youth with violent messages. Parents inflict violence on their children repeatedly, Sennels claims, and at the same time deliver religious ideology. He says this behaviour makes Muslim extremists far more violent than extremists of other religious faiths. The brainwashing, as Sennels terms it, begins very early on in a child's life, and religious messages are repeated vigorously along with a heavy dose of physical discipline. It is this combination of pain and reinforcement that creates Islamic monsters who then feel justified in torturing and killing innocent people. World at 8. He is absolutely right. Denmark, outsourcing to China doesn't pay off. Danish companies are barking up the wrong tree when they shift their production to China. There is actually more profit in sending part of the production to expensive countries such as Germany, new study suggests. We'll start with an imaginary example. A Danish producer of hearing aids needs various parts to build a new hearing aid, for instance a speaker and a microphone, which the company decides to have manufactured overseas. From a business point of view, the company would be better off having the parts produced in Germany than in cheaper China, because the quality is higher, Germans are good at making speakers, and maybe the Poles are good at making microphones. By exploiting the strength we know each country has, the end product, the hearing aid, will be of the highest quality. 2. The closer to Denmark the parts are being manufactured, the lower the cost of importing them to Denmark. 3. Countries far away from Denmark are likely to have a different culture, other rules, and perhaps other forms of communication, which may make it harder or more expensive to manufacture, for example speakers and microphones that fit perfectly into the end product. World at 8. When are we going to fly our own flag, or even the European one? And I don't mean the EU that tries to send everything out of Europe. Europeans make things better. They always have done. The only things in the past that the Far East exported were drugs, women, people and crime. I now hand you over to Imno Kafar for his report on the invasion of Italy.
The invasion of Italy. Now, this is a very interesting article that comes from Riposte Ligue, which is a French journal. In 2011, Riccardo Muti, internationally acclaimed conductor, spoke with emotion and lucidness about the decline of Italy and Europe. He encouraged the public to sing the chorus of the Hebrew slaves, Va Pensiero, from the opera Nabucco by Verdi. Riccardo Muti didn't know that the worst was yet to come. Italy has become a land of conquest. Senseless waves of invaders arrive every day in Sicily and Lampedusa. Already before the drowning of the immigrants in October 2013, they were coming by thousands. But since October the 3rd, 2013, after the media and politicians labelled the Italians as guilty, and all Europeans as well, accusing them of being responsible for the accident, the Italian Navy, under the orders from the EU, has been forced to implement Operation Mare Nostrum that goes looking for boatloads of immigrants every day in the middle of the Mediterranean to bring them back to the Italian coast. This must be the first time in the whole history of humanity the navy of a country that participates in the invasion of a country it is supposed to be defending. It would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic. And there is more icing on the cake regarding the disdain for Italians and European peoples. On January the 21st, the Italian Senate abolished the crime of illegal entry. This means that anybody without a visa, with no papers, can come and settle in Italy without violating any law. An illegal arriving in Italy immediately has the right to food and shelter, free medical care and pocket money of €35 a day. 85% of retired Italians have less than €30 a day, and you must with this sum pay for rent, food, etc. It's tragic, and it's enough to make you cry. It's a real piss take. Regarding national health, many migrants bring multi-resistant tuberculosis, and many have HIV and other exotic diseases that they liberally will share with the Italian populace and the rest of us. That's where we are. It's a veritable genocide that we Europeans are undergoing. We know that thousands of potential immigrants are waiting on the shores of Africa to cross over. Now remember, this was done in 2013, and we now know that there's 800,000 waiting to cross over. How we're going to cope with this, I just do not know. If we do not wake up at once, as the formidable Magdi Allen says, racism will explode in Europe because the natives are being discriminated against in favour of the immigrants. Magdi Allen made the news a few years ago when he converted to Catholicism from Islam. He addressed the EU Parliament in Strasbourg on February the 26th, 2014, declaring he will vote no on a bill that will protect the immigrants, including Roma gypsies and even suspected terrorists, against the interests of European peoples. He said, "I will vote against the resolution on fundamental rights in the EU because this Europe will implode, not because rights are not respected, but because duties have been forgotten. We will increase more and more the rights and freedoms of newcomers without asking them in exchange to do their duty and respect our rules. Before worrying about discrimination against the gypsies, the immigrants, and even suspected terrorists, we must concern ourselves with the discrimination that is bearing down on the citizens. In my country, Italy, it is the Italians who are discriminated against when they seek housing, daycare, subsidies and social welfare. This is a disgrace. As a former immigrant, proud of being an Italian citizen, as a sociologist and a journalist who has spent 35 years on immigration issues, I feel I have the duty to warn this Europe about an explosion, a wave of racism, not, as this bill would lead you to believe, because the immigrants and suspected terrorists are discriminated against, but because the citizens of the European countries are discriminated against as a result of our submission to a globalist immigrationist ideology and a bleeding heart moral relativism. I rebel against a Europe that proposes such a resolution. I say no to a Europe that acts as if it were a deserted land, where every person who arrives sets up his own tent and lays down his own conditions. Europe is being transformed into a land of conquest. Now, on a final note, these are fine words from Magdi Allen, but it may be too late. If Italy, which has managed until recently to stem massive waves of barbarians entering from non-European lands, can no longer hold back the tsunami, and if the forces which have influence, such as the Vatican, the Italian government, the deluded people themselves, who are voluntarily blinded to reality, what can be done? And the military has to obey orders, as in France, where the police, gendarmes, etc., obey a treasonous government. But the people themselves are responsible, insofar as they did not make any attempt to fight the liberal propaganda machines that hammered away day and night from 1968 onwards. Egalitarianism, white guilt, a dream of one world, a dream of an Arabized Europe, a dream of racially mixed populations, and the slow demise of Christianity as it is transmogrified into a branch of socialism, have penetrated the collective European, Italian and French consciousness, not to mention we Brits. Some are beginning to wake up, but when they realise the situation, they may just turn round and go back to sleep.
Thank you, Eric. I look forward to your next report. World News. IMF demands Ukraine risk World War III in return for bailout money. The IMF has told Kiev that if it doesn't defend eastern areas of Ukraine against pro-Russian forces, or in other words risk going to war with Russia and starting World War III, that a planned $17 billion bailout package will have to be redesigned. IMF head Christine Lagarde said that the global body would check regularly to see if Ukraine was keeping up with its commitments on which the loan deal is dependent. One of those commitments includes a vow to use military forces to repel Russian influence in the east of the country. The IMF has told Kiev that the money spigot could be cut off if Kiev loses control over the east of the country. Which, roughly translated, appears to mean go to war with pro-Russian forces and thus Russia itself if Putin sees his apparent countrymen in trouble, or you don't get your money, notes Zero Hedge. World at 8, good old financial blackmail again. It worked in Greece, didn't it? US-EU space missions depend on Russian technology. If Russia were to boycott space missions due to the Ukraine crisis, the results would be dramatic for the United States and Europe. Without Russian technology, Western countries' missions couldn't get off the ground. 6 people are currently on board the International Space Station, ISS, 3 Russians, 1 astronaut from Japan and 2 Americans. They each headed up by way of the Russian Soyuz spacecraft launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Currently there is no other way to reach the ISS. Russia to beef up Black Sea Fleet. Russia plans to allocate more than 86 billion rubles, that's $2.4 billion US, to strengthen its Black Sea Fleet by 2020, Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu said recently. New air defence and marine units will be formed at our fleet bases this year. New submarines will be supplied to the Black Sea Fleet this year alongside next generation surface ships, Shoigu told a teleconference. He said the fleet had always been supplied proportionately, but adjustment to its development programme was needed due to the recent incorporation of Crimea and Sevastopol, the Interfax news agency reported. FBI, flow of foreign fighters into Syria growing. The flow of foreign fighters into Syria has grown in just the last few months, with dozens of Americans joining the country's conflict along with thousands of Europeans, FBI Director James Comey said Friday. Comey compared the situation in Syria to that of Afghanistan several decades ago, when thousands of Muslims worldwide who travelled to the country during the 10-year Soviet occupation returned home with the fervour of jihad and in some cases sought to overthrow their own governments. All of us with a memory of the 80s and 90s saw the line drawn from Afghanistan in the 80s and 90s to September the 11th, he said. We see Syria as that, but an order of magnitude worse, because more foreign fighters are going there and the country is easier to travel to and back from. He said it was inevitable that there would be a similar desperia out of Syria and added, "We are determined not to let lines be drawn from Syria today to a future 9/11. World at 8. Whilst I'm glad these so-called Brits and Americans are going back to their homeland, I'm sorry for Assad. We will soon need to help him fight these bastards in his own country, or else we will be fighting them in our countries. Make your choice." Gang-raped Indonesian woman may be caned publicly. An Indonesian woman who was gang-raped by men who accused her of having extramarital sex may be caned publicly for violating Islamic law, an official said Wednesday. The 25-year-old widow said she was raped by 8 men who allegedly found her having sex with a married man in her house. The men reportedly beat the man, doused the 2 with sewage and then turned them over to Islamic police in conservative Aceh province. The alleged attack occurred early Thursday in Lokbani, a village in the East Aceh district. The head of Islamic Sharia law in the district, Ibrahim Latif, said the 2 could be punished with 9 strokes of a cane for violating religious law pending an investigation. Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim nation of 240 million people, has a policy of secularism but allows Aceh, a predominantly Muslim province on the northern tip of Sumatra, to implement a version of Sharia Islamic law. Police have arrested 3 of the 8 men, including a 13-year-old boy, and are hunting for the others, Latif said. He added that the men would be tried under the criminal code, which can carry a maximum penalty of 15 years. World at 8. If they serve that, it will be a miracle down to Allah. Thought for the day. Cheese, food and truths. With so much anti-truths and misinformation in the news, I'm finding it difficult to stick to one subject. So today I won't, as life is made up of many facets. Just take it as it comes. Cheese. You'll be pleased to know that the Chinese have banned our cheese from being imported into their country. Now I find this odd, as we don't export cheese to China anyway, do we? The French, however, are tickled pink, as apparently their production methods fit in with the Chinese idea, so God knows how they do it, and cheese à la Française is more welcome than ours from the UK and Ireland. Now whilst I find this laughable, as we in the UK, due to our programming over the last 40 odd years, eat anything and everything that is produced in whatever manner possible from whomever probable, and don't seem to care either how it is produced, the methodology or the often dubious beginnings, and our health and safety guys don't care even when it is patently obvious that a local takeaway is running short of local cats and dogs. I find that very, very odd. On the subject of food, I received an email which, in this instance, I did take note of, as it was from our good friend I'm No Kafar. Now it came from the US, but the programme was shown on 60 Minutes, and of course we import a huge amount of food from China and the Far East, and in fact even run so low as to send our own shrimps out to Thailand to be repacked and sent back to our supermarkets. So that is how the UK and the West are funding the third world and giving us bad food. We've been warned in the media about buying foreign produced and packed food, and as we all seem to have our heads up our arses, we continue to buy and do not read labels. Do the Brits know how to read a label? I doubt it. Even our own air travel firms employ cheap Asian labour to pack God knows what for our on-flight meals, and these people could have any transmittable disease. The message is out, Brits don't care and will eat or drink anything, so open season my friends. Roll up the shrimpy barbies this summer. Recently a food inspector on television said he'd lived overseas and he'd seen the filthy conditions their foods are raised and processed in. It is enough to make you violently ill. Some foreign workers have to wear masks as they work in these places because the food is so rotten and filthy, it makes them want to throw up. Many of their fish on fish farms are fed raw sewage daily. He said he's seen so much filth throughout their food growing and processing that he would never eat any of it. They raise this filth, put some food colouring and some flavourings on it, then they ship it to the USA, UK, Canada and Australia for you to consume and feed to your families. They have no food and safety inspectors. They ship it to you to buy and poison your families and friends. They don't care. End of quote. India, a prolific exporter of fruit to us of course, as we must house the largest population of Indians out of the subcontinent, has now been banned from sending us mangoes as they can contain the fruit fly, which along with many other flies and pests not indigenous to the UK or indeed Europe can cause havoc on what farming we still do undertake. This point has been missed out by the exhorters of immigration. Where you get a foreigner, or in our case multiples of foreign parasites coming here, they bring their kitchens with them. And now, thanks to the multicultural dream, there are parts of this country now where you cannot breathe English air but the rancid stench of Calcutta as the norm. No, we Brits are plain stupid. We watch hordes of cooking programmes where food we cannot afford is cooked when few of us can really spare the time from our iPads to actually cook, and think we are being educated. First things first, much of what comes in from the Far East is bad for you. It is not made with your good in mind or the good of your children. It is manufactured for money by mainly people or peoples who would soak their family pet in honey and export it if paid. We Brits do not have to be greedy and delusional the entire time, or do we? And the appalling thing is that even if you exercise some right of choice, the average shop and supermarket now only stocks Far Eastern crap in favour of UK or European goods to take away your choice. So you have to buy what they display. It is all in the plan, my friends, all in the plan. Man in the street may moan about more expensive foods, but if he spent less on his second-rate holidays and IKEA, smoking and drinking, he'd be able to afford a choice in what he eats. But clearly this is not as important to him, or his, as one would hope to believe. We have fulfilled the mantra of a lost population. We simply do not care anymore. Votes? Why, they're all the same. Food? The Pizza Hut looks good, doesn't it? Education? What's that? I'll thump any teacher who tells my Damien he ain't learning. Holidays? Don't remember, too bladdered. NHS? Don't care, just get me antidepressants regular. Ethnics outbreeding us? Well, we're all going to be khaki one day, innit? When's Britain's Got Talent on then? The sight of poor old Freddie Starr on the news last night just shows how vicious the media is to popular people, not ethnics, not lefties, just comedians, and bloody funny ones at that. Operation U-Tree, initiated by our murky friend Nazir Afzal to take the heat away from his fellow countrymen abusing and raping real underage children, not just getting a blowjob of some strapping 17-year-old shown dressed like a second-rate hooker who does some sort of exotic dancing or whatever, as in the case of poor Max Clifford. 8 years he has, and yet Afzal's gene pool is still carrying on the family business in Rochdale and everywhere else, untouched in reality. Now, don't get me wrong, child abuse, rape of young females and underage molestations are repugnant crimes if committed by anyone and should not be ignored once reported. I stand with my own sex on that one. However, old birds, umpteen years too late, well over the age for child abuse even then, and trolling around chatting up famous guys for jobs is the well-known circle of the fan club and the couch casting scenario, and is probably still with us. However, all of these poor old guys are white and practically don't have a breath left in them. Savile they are not, and even he was not alive to answer any allegations against him, true though they might have been. So apart from Afzal and his anti-white beagles and plods, what is the basis of all these sad cases? Money, lucre, shekels, dollars. I would bet that most, if not all, these poor, suffering, traumatised and ruined lives will brighten up immediately once the pounds hit the spot, courtesy of the vultures of the legal brigades. Life in the 60s and 70s and indeed supposedly the 80s was rife with bum pinching and free blowjobs all around, was it? Was it? No one in Afzal's office has mentioned the blowjobs his religious pals got when little underage girls in Blackpool had to work off a packet of free chips, have they? You see, we Brits are dumb and dumber and need to wake up to the real enemy within. And finally, would you Adam and Eve it? God said, "Adam, I want you to do something for me." Adam said, "Gladly, Lord. What do you want me to do?" God said, "Go down into that valley." Adam said, "What's a valley?" God explained it to him. Then God said, "Cross the river." Adam said, "What's a river?" God explained that to him and then said, "Go over to the hill." Adam said, "What is a hill?" So God explained that to Adam what a hill was. He told Adam on the other side of the hill you'll find a cave. Adam said, "What's a cave?" After God explained, he said, "In the cave you will find a woman." Adam said, "What's a woman?" So God explained that to him too. Then God said, "I want you to reproduce." Adam said, "How do I do that?" God first said under his breath, "Jeez." And then, just like everything else, God explained that to Adam as well. So Adam goes down into the valley, across the river and over the hill, into the cave and finds the woman. Then in about 30 minutes he was back. God, his patience wearing thin, said angrily, "What is it now?" And Adam said, and you're going to love this one, "What's a headache?" You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I wish you all a very good night.